Welcome back to Pop Talk. This week we're going to be talking about Taylor Swift. So if you don't know, T-Swift is going to be releasing a re-recording of her 2008 album, Fearless, in April. The reason she's doing this is because she no longer owns the rights to the music of that album. In fact, she doesn't own the rights to the first 6 albums that she released. See, when Taylor was 14 in 2004, and I cannot stress that enough, 14, she signed a music deal with the label Big Machine, which released her self-titled first album in 2006, 2 years later. Now, Taylor took off. I don't know if you've ever heard of her before, but she's a big deal. And as she grew in popularity, she eventually became 80% of Big Machine's revenue every year. In 2019, Big Machine was bought by media entrepreneur Scooter Braun, or rather his company. So Braun, along with a couple of other entrepreneurs, spent $300 million in order to buy Big Machine. And in that acquisition, they got Taylor's masters, which means that they profit every time that anybody, including you, buys one of her albums or listens to her music on Spotify or YouTube Music, but not Google Play, because that's now defunct. This is problematic for a number of reasons, but primarily because Taylor had been trying to buy her masters for a number of years at this point. Her original contract expired in 2017. And the purchase stung all the more because Taylor had a professional relationship with Braun and called him a bully. So she didn't like the fact that he had her music. And Braun said that she could buy the masters from him if she would sign a non-disclosure agreement so that she wouldn't say anything mean about him in public. And she rightfully refused. So Braun actually ended up selling the music rights to a company called Shamrock Holdings, which, believe it or not, is owned by Disney. So Disney now owns the rights to Taylor Swift music, and they get money every time you listen to it on Spotify. But she doesn't get a cent. So that's why Taylor's re-releasing her music, because she wants to profit whenever anybody listens to her music sung with her voice. And isn't it kind of weird that she doesn't already get the profit from that? I mean, contracts aside, it's odd that someone else can profit from the creations of another person. A more extreme example of not being compensated is the case of Henrietta Lacks, who was an African-American woman who, despite dying in 1951, still has cells alive today. Lacks had cancer, and a sample of those cancer cells continued to divide and multiply after they were removed from her body. Copies of those cells with Henrietta's DNA in them have helped research into cancer, AIDS, and even helped cure polio. There are over 11,000 patents from research done with Henrietta cells right now. But her family has never seen a cent from any of it. In fact, they didn't even know that the cells existed until 1975, 24 years after her death. They had never given permission for the cells to be harvested. After decades, there was finally a judge ruling on the matter, and it was found that a person's discarded tissues and cells are not the property and can be commercialized. And again, Henrietta and her family were African Americans. And there is definitely something to be said about the dehumanizing commodification and the lack of morality that played a part in the doctors who started experimenting on the cells that never informed the family. But if you think that you're immune to these ethical violations in 2021, let me ask you, has anyone in your family sent their DNA off to 23andMe or Ancestry.com or one of those DNA testing sites? Because if you have, those companies now have access to your DNA. the very thing that makes you, you, that information is being stored somewhere, and they can sell it. They can make a profit off of the thing that makes you you. And you would never even be the wiser about it. So we understand that the commodification of persons feels wrong, right? Profiting off of the voice, the cells, the DNA of another person. See, this is a basic tenet of the philosophical idea of liberalism. Now, whatever you think liberalism is, cast it aside for now, because that's not what I'm talking about probably. Classical liberalism is essentially the idea that individuals have rights. Now, different political movements center around how the distribution of profit should be distributed, but it's generally believed by all people across the political spectrum that everyone has basic freedoms and rights. So, according to liberalism, do we own ourselves? Well, the father of liberalism himself, John Locke, seemed to think so. He put it like this: the individual has a right to decide what would become of himself and what he would do, and as having a right to reap the benefits of what he did. Now, within the market of capital, this ideal could lead to paradoxes. What happens when the benefits of one person begin to infringe on the rights of another? For instance, let's say you have a town next to a lake. That's their source of water. But someone comes in and builds a factory and dumps pollutants into that lake. In a situation like this, let me bring in another libertarian heavyweight, Thomas Hobbes, who's a tiger. Hopefully some of you get that joke. But Hobbes talked about the social contract. That is a thing that individuals make with a sovereign state. It is an agreement in which individuals give up a certain amount of freedoms so that the state can create laws to regulate social interactions, to mediate conflicts, and enforce justice. So if our contaminated water example were to happen in the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency would step up and handle the polluting factory. Because even though within liberalism, the factory owner has a right to run the factory, they could not do so if it infringed on the rights of others. So under this basic tenet of liberalism, Henrietta Lacks' rights were infringed upon because she does not have a say in how her cells with her DNA in them were being used. Now, that's not to say that there aren't other sides to the argument. Henrietta's cells helped cure polio, right? Which was a disease that killed or paralyzed up to 500,000 people a year. So there could be a utilitarian argument made that the benefits outweigh the infringement of Henrietta's rights. But for me personally, since all it would have taken was for them to inform Henrietta and her family what they were doing, and because they are definitely being deprived of the profits that they deserve, I believe it's immoral. But what about Taylor? Should she have to re-record her songs to gain profit from her own music? Well, technically, she acted within the social contract when she signed the deal with the big machine. Though, again, I must reiterate, she was 14. So still technically, she doesn't own them. But from a classical liberalism perspective, the companies that own her masters only profit from her labor. And it could be argued, and I would argue, that infringes on her rights to reap the benefit of her work. And she deserves a portion, if not most of, the profit. So, in the future, when you're listening to your favorite Taylor Swift songs from between 2007 and 2017, be sure to listen to Taylor's version. You'll be making the philosophers of the Enlightenment proud.